This is Just Ask George, exploring the universe of corporate finance and capital formation for your business enterprise, with merchant banker George Lovato Jr. and your host, David Wolf. Welcome back to Just Ask George. David Wolf here with the one and only infamous George Lovato Jr. from BH Capital, the founder and head dude.
You know, when we give each other a pound there for a while, you were kind of doing this. You know, you're kind of laying it out there.
Really?
Now you're back to the solid pound again.
And I've got sound effects for that.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, you know, you're a solid dude.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And as I've said before on many occasions, I'll take it wherever I can get it. Thank you. So, business owners come to us and they think they know. First of all, they're coming to us for capital, right?
Correct.
And they think they know.
And in some cases, it's capital and management advice. Sometimes it's, you know, looking at the company from a strategic perspective. And sometimes it's evaluating what the company is, its capacities are. So capital comes along with all of those other functions. But
it's not just the fact that capital is required. It's we're going to talk about how much capital do you really need, and all the surrounding circumstances from a management perspective and from our perspective.
Interesting that 90% of the time the inquiry from the prospect is incorrect. Their assumptions about what they really do need is wrong. And not making any disparaging remarks that everybody in the world is stupid and we're the only smart guys. It's the tools they're using in most cases to evaluate and analyze what they do need aren't there, or they're not familiar with them.
From your experience, what are some of the common missteps in terms of coming up with the number that's wrong? I mean, what are they doing wrong?
Well, the first theory is I can borrow my way out of debt. So, and give me more money so I can solve problems.
Okay.
So let's just work down those two paths. The first, I'm gonna borrow my way out of debt. Their assumption is that I just need to reorganize my debt, consolidate all these different debt pieces together with one consolidated payment and a lower interest rate, and my problem is solved. That's sort of a prevailing theme that just blows in the wind all the time. They're wrong. You know, it's about what the debt service capacity is of the company. So even after you consolidate it and lower the interest rate, they're having problems paying it now. The improvement that you're going to get isn't going to change the complexion of the balance sheet and or their cash flow that significantly. Yeah. So sometimes you have to take them through that whole demonstration process and say, you know, here's what it's going to look like. You know, how much cash flow you're really gleaning out of this.
Exactly. If you were to consolidate and roll it all together, it's quote unquote.
And let's look at the costs to get there. Yeah. So that's sort of out of the equation.
You see this a lot. This idea, consolidate, let's borrow our way out of trouble.
Yeah.
That hybrid.
Then the next one, which, you know, the second path is it's a little more frequent in that just give me a line of credit. You know, all I need is a line of credit, and that will allow me, when I need money, to do the things I need to do. Okay? And oddly enough, it isn't. Because giving them more debt isn't really the issue. Sometimes, you know, as we've talked about in numerous past shows, we've talked about the need and when the head of equity rises and says, feed me, you know. Balancing the balance sheet. But their ideas continually come back to, well, all I need is a line of credit. You know, give me a line of credit, give me more debt so that I can do the things I want to do. And then I take the time to really drill down on, okay, now how are you going to pay this back? Where's this cash coming from that's going to allow you to service the debt on the line of credit? How are you going to pay the money back? And a lot of times they'll, and these are, you know, in a lot of cases, mature entrepreneurs. and they'll say, well, after I'm able to put money in X, Y, and Z, sales are going to sail through the roof, and then I'm going to be able to, well, okay. You haven't ever demonstrated that before, even when you have gotten money. Currently, one client, and they'll remain nameless, in the past few months, they've gotten almost $500,000 in outside money, okay, in the form of debt.
In the form of debt. Okay.
And the source that's providing that, we provided some of it, but it's coming from another private source that every time the entrepreneur yells uncle,
right,
the source puts and it's not doing the entrepreneur any good because they're not able to service that debt.
This is a big problem. This is huge. This is the problem you're describing on steroids.
Right. So you're enabling the entrepreneur by giving them more debt, and then they're unable to pay it back. And meanwhile, the sales of the business are doing this. And the discussion is, well, we just, all we need to do is borrow enough money. Here was the response. Just let us borrow enough money to put a principal and interest reserve on this, so gives us the time to make those payments on that new debt of $2, $3, $4 million. And by the time that we burn up that principal and interest reserve, we'll be out of the hole. The company has never demonstrated the ability to service its debt.
That's really key, isn't it? You look at history.
Yeah,
you say,
go back.
What's going on here?
Yeah, and so there is a classic case where there's a shield wall of other ideas that are interfering with the reality of the previous performance.
Okay, if I want to reframe the question a little bit for you and just see where you go with the response in a more opportunistic kind of framework where you have a company that is demonstrating successful sales and they do have the capacity to expand in everyone's view, the collective view, yours, the client. How do you know how much cash it's going to take to build a national brand, to take the big orders from a Walmart? How do you deal with that from your perspective, guiding them?
Well, in looking back in the historical performance of the company, usually the successful ones borrow and pay back, borrow and pay back, borrow and pay back, borrow and pay back. There's a consistent cycle there.
Yeah.
And every time they've borrowed money and they've paid it back, you've seen the company step up one more rung on the success ladder. They grow into it. Okay. I can't tell you what the odds are, but they're awfully slim to lay a boatload of debt on a company and say, okay, I maybe less than 1% of the time I've seen it where it's been able to perform appropriately. But in the other 99% of the time, when I have seen that happen, the company yet eventually fails.
Do you tend to think about equity or debt similarly in that? In other words, a boatload of money. Either form.
I mean, equity has to generate returns.
So it's the same.
So
it's really
you don't put equity in and say, okay, well, forget about it. That's free money. That's that's federal grant money now. So I don't have to. It has to generate a return.
Sure.
So what I try and do is take the entrepreneur through the balance sheet exercise and say, okay, let's throw this debt on. Let's see what you look like. Let's look at these ratios. Now, assuming that this debt is on the balance sheet, now let's look at how your P&L has to perform. Mm-hmm. And about 95% of the time, they come back and go, oh, well, then I can't afford that much debt.
There it is. They just haven't looked at it.
They really, and then what they do, because you can do anything you want with numbers, right? Mm. So while they're putting their performa together, they'll say, okay, here's the debt I think, here's my wish list of all the things I want to do. And it's A through Z, okay? And each one of those items, there's a dollar amount attached. Then what they do is they adjust the top end of the performa, the projection, and say, well, we just got to get here, rather than saying this is what our marketing and management capacity is. This is what we can do based on what we've got here, right? In the here and now.
Yeah.
And so you fudge the numbers, and then you go, see, I can do this. But what they really haven't evaluated is the story that is behind reaching that top line number. And then there's not only the story, there's the people. We're right back to people again. Who's in the organization to be able to drive those numbers to service that debt. And then ultimately, when do you expect to be successful? It's like, this one company I was telling you about, which is, it just keeps, this outside private party keeps providing more and more capital or debt. And it's sort of, how would I describe that? Negative reinforcement.
Absolutely.
Okay. And as a result, then when you really look at the business of the business and how it's doing, it's bleeding. Okay. It's hemorrhaging at every point you could possibly look. The sales have been steadily declining. There's been no supplemental marketing effort. There's no management in the company that are, financially managing dollars, cents, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, and there's no cohesive marketing effort. I mean, the marketing effort comes and goes, and sales continue to decline. So in the real world, if you see that, you say, well, I've got to change the people part of the formula. I have to change how it is I generate the business, because what I'm doing now isn't working. It clearly isn't working with the declining sales. And I don't need any more debt because I'm not servicing what I've got. So let's start with getting the rake and the shovel and the pick out and doing all the spade work that needs to be done to correct the course of the company before you add in any more debt. Now, all right,
huge.
A successful company, which I have in my portfolio, conversely, these guys have continually, I think they're back for the 6th time now. And every single time that we've made capital available to them, it's been about a 2-year cycle, and they pay it off, and their sales rise, and they increase the number of inventory and locations, and they keep growing, and they have a very steady, controlled formula. And so when you say, well, let's look back and see how they've performed, it is borrow, pay back, borrow, pay back, borrow, pay back, borrow, and grow. Okay, so the rhythm and the tempo of their performance is just dramatically different than this other company.
In the short amount of time we have left, that control formula you talk about, this is where we help. This is where you help as the BH Capital head dude. How do you guide them to a control formula? Is there one? It's not a one size fits all. Clearly,
sometimes unfortunately, there are cases where you cannot be successful with the client. The client is resistant to understanding this is the way the real world works.
Back to people.
And but the vast majority of the time we are successful, and we're making those determinations about their pattern of success and their capacities, both the human resource, the human capital element, as well as the performance that they've demonstrated in the past. So our first goal in the process of determining what they do need is, what does it look like looking back? What does it look like going forward based on what they've done back? Is it a hockey stick, or is it, at a 20-degree angle? I mean, where is it? And we also look at how the company is going to be re-architected when we're done. What's the picture after we're finished? Okay.
You're visualizing it, you're creating it.
Exactly. And then the question is, is there sufficient people inside the business to organize the growth to the next level? Once you answer those questions, then you kind of go back and say, yeah, all the puzzle parts are here. And, this from just those basic analytical perspectives, this all works. So then you start to work on the structure that actually complements the balance sheet. It actually assists in the company's growth, and people are able to manage those opportunities. So I can tell you there's, it's a definitive step 1, step 2, step 3, and then step 4 is actually applying the structure.
It sounds like it's a dynamic and a real-time idea, and also forward and backward,
right,
from the financial statements to the people and those controls in the middle.
And like I've said in the past, it is sometimes It's sort of breaking the ice and pushing their head to the surface and saying, "This is what this."
Wake up and smell the coffee.
Yeah, now that we can breathe again. But that truly is it. Is kind of removing those old ideas, those incorrect perceptions, those applications of certain tools that aren't appropriate for their uses. And then once that's done, then it's 1, 2, 3.
He's so good. We're hitting 2 million views on YouTube.
I think we're gonna break 2 million with this show,
dude.
You know,
he's the man.
Oh, you the man.
No,
the best guy in the media space today. The Howard Stern of corporate finance, right here. You really? I'm serious.
Oh, shucks, folks, I'm speechless.
What do you say?
1939, The Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. No, please do pay attention. bhcapitalltd.com. And anything else to report
Another
from your
great
side?
Show. No, nothing. The book is book 3 is coming along. We're just a hair's breadth away from releasing it here. Really excited about it.
Excellent.
I mean, there's a lot of good information.
We'll be talking about that in a future episode. Thanks for joining us again. Thanks, George.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
For more information about George Lovato Jr. and BH Capital, visit bhcapitalltd.com. Check out more episodes of Just Ask George at justaskgeorgeradio.com. Just Ask George is produced by Steve Garth and is a production of BH Capital Ltd. All rights reserved.